Hey, Clemson family, spring football is well underway, and with the players taking a breather for spring break, Daniel and I will take a look at the things each of us wants to see in hopes of a 2023 playoff berth happening.
I'm Daniel Shirley. We'll also talk about the running backs from 2022, what we saw from that group. And hey, we've got a basketball game on Thursday night with the women in the WNIT.
Great to see basketball still happening on campus. I'm Bill Zimmerman. Glad everyone's joining us either at youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff or the major podcast apps. This is episode 69 of the Reign Supreme All-Way podcast. Subscribe and follow the show. Be sure to follow us on social media too. We are at Clemson Kickoff on Twitter and on Instagram, and that's where we keep you up to things in between episodes. So about spring football, you've got some time under guys' belts already. We've still got at least a couple of weeks to go until that spring game. And there are some things that each of us would like to see. And Daniel, I'll let you get it kicked off because I think what you're going to say is kind of what's on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, it feels like a good time to do this, right? They've had 6 practices. They're off this week for spring break. They come back next week. They've got 4 practices next week. Mine is I want to see how crisp the offense is, Bill. I want to see how they get in and out of plays. I want to see how much time they use off the clock. I want to see if there's any motion penalties or guys not knowing their assignments, those kinds of things. That is, for me, the biggest part of what we need to see from this team coming up this spring and into the start of the season is just how crisp is this offense and how on point are all these players running this new system.
Especially the receivers, they're going to have some adjustments to make. Under the previous system, they used to stay on either the short side of the field or the wide side of the field and switch sides depending where the ball was. This time, they'll either be staying on the left of the quarterback or staying on the right of the quarterback. Different set of variables, but Garrett Riley feels like that narrows things down. It's a better fit for the air raid passing game that he brings into Clemson. So seeing those adjustments and hopefully with the guys who are out there, seeing them more comfortable than perhaps they were last year and better ability to stay on the same page as a quarterback than we saw last year, especially during the second half of the season with DJ Uiagalelei, that would be a plus. That would definitely boost the offense.
It would, and it feels like, at least from what we've heard so far in spring practices, they're not going to try to do as much. I mean, you heard Cade Klubnik talk about at one point they had 80 plays in the playbook going into a game, and now it's down to 30. Is he exactly right with those numbers? Maybe not, but even if he's close, that's a lot more manageable than maybe what they were doing before. And I would love to see them do less and do it better. And that's what it sounds like they're going to do. And that goes back to knowing the system, knowing what you're supposed to do, knowing your assignments. All those things are going to be huge this season.
You can read a little bit about this in an e-magazine that we're working on that'll be coming out soon. The first 2 pages are the quarterback Cade Klubnik and the offensive coordinator Garrett Riley. Some previous episodes of the podcast featured in there. You can play them right inside the e-magazine, as well as details about the spring game, another copy of the schedule for 2023 regular season. Check that out, clemsonkickoff.com. We'll be posting that. You know, the thing that I want to see the most is how is the open field tackling going to improve and how much of a solid hit, wrapping a guy up, stopping his momentum, whatever you want to call it, preventing yards after contact. I want to see a better job from individual defenders making that happen. And there weren't just certain guys that were struggling with that. I felt like it was a trend across the defense last year. And I would love to see someone who loves to dive into the stats tell me, hey, how often did yards after contact on first down or second down end up creating a third and short instead of a difficult third and long? How often did that tendency from Clemson's defenders end up sustaining drives for the opposition, giving them more play calling options on third down, allowing teams to stay on the field and keep that Clemson defense on the field, not allow the Clemson offense to get the ball back? I think that's a big game changer. I really do believe that for all of Clemson's problems last year, that was one of them. You didn't see those, hey, I'm going to stand this guy up. Even if I can't get him to the ground, he's not getting much more than another half a yard before somebody else gets here and helps me finish him off. I don't think we saw as much of that last year as we were accustomed to seeing with those defenses of the playoff era that really spoiled us.
Yeah, spoiled is probably the right word there. And I think that this team was inconsistent on defense, really across the board. And it was inconsistent with their assignments, inconsistent with everything, but tackling was one of the big pieces of what we saw last year. There was just some really poor tackling at times from this team. Now, some games they weren't. That wasn't part of the problem, but there were several games where the tackling really was a struggle uh, throughout the 2022 season, and that's got to get cleaned up. They've got to be better with that, and hopefully, Wes Goodwin and this staff another year together. The whole staff is back now as far as the main coaches on the field. That hopefully will help. And, some of the players step up and show some experience as well, but they've got to get better with their tackling.
I'll also admit that when people are focusing on the defense during the orange and white spring game, that's probably not going to be on their minds. Probably what they're going to be looking at more are some of the freshmen who are going to be out there on the field. In particular, defensive lineman Peter Woods, where he's going to be lining up, and just how well his skill translates quickly out of the gate for the Tigers.
I think Peter Woods is a huge piece of the puzzle, Bill. I really do. And this freshman group, I'm really excited about that group up front, and even the group in the back end, the two freshman safeties. I really believe this group from the 2023 class on defense can have a huge impact on this defense. Really excited to see that. Maybe it is just a case of having more depth and having more good players than maybe what we saw last year. But I also feel like it is the coaching staff being together for a year and just kind of all of it at once. All of it has to be a little bit better, maybe knowing the system a little bit better, being a little bit faster. Maybe they tackle better because of that. I think all of that can be true.
And it's not just Woods. You've got Vic Burley, you've got Stephelen Green, you've got TJ Parker on that front line. You've got Shelton Lewis at cornerback earning a lot of praise, even going back to the bowl practices when he was already working out with the team as an early enrollee. And the linebackers, Jamal Anderson, D. Creighton, the safeties, Khalil Barnes, Colin Webb, three offensive linemen coming into the mix. And you've already heard the coaches, at least on the defensive side of the ball, say, yeah, that does kind of create a push. It does kind of force someone who's a returning veteran to maybe practice 100%. You hope a rising tide lifts all boats, and you would hope that the veterans and the freshmen will push one another in unison, kind of help this team through the spring. It can start to feel like a long spring a little bit. I do think it's a critical one, though, particularly for the offensive system install, even though a lot of guys are hurt and missing time. But that defense does have some things to work on, and they've got to make the most of their time with each other and with the coaching staff, get a lot under their belts, and get ready before the summer and the fall workouts begin. Be sure to subscribe on youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff or follow us on your favorite podcast app. Let's go into the running backs and how they performed in 2022. If anybody wants to take the spring off and maybe get away with it, it would be Will Shipley and Phil Mafah in my book. I think they were the two best players on offense last year. Shipley with 1,202 yards and 15 touchdowns on 210 carries. Mafah with 521 yards and 4 TDs on a sparse 98 carries. And the snaps were even more disparate. Shipley doubling up and then some, 646 to Mafah's 308. I think Mafah should be able to push Shipley a little more. I think Mafah should be able to actually help Shipley rest a little bit more as well. The gap between them is not nearly as wide as Travis Etienne and any of the other reserves during his run with Clemson. So you'd really like to see that play out. Have Shipley be fresh for the snaps he's on the field. Have Mafah have a chance to get on a little bit more of a role, get more productive. Not a lot to watch for them in the spring because their season in 2022 was so solid for each of them.
They were both outstanding, Bill. I'll take it even a step further. I think they were the best two players on the whole team last year. And how many times did we hear after games, well, yeah, we should have gotten them more carries? And you look at the three losses, especially the South Carolina loss and the Tennessee loss, and you say, if you run the ball more, you probably take some pressure off your defense. You probably control the clock a little bit more. You help the offense be a little more efficient, and you probably win both of those games. I just feel like they didn't get the ball enough, especially Phil Mafah. I really think we should see more out of him coming up in 2023. And with having the new offense coordinator with Garrett Riley and the new offense and how we've seen him use running backs, really excited to see what he could do with these two guys because they're as good of any running back duo in the country. And it'll be nice to see them get the ball even more than they have in the past.
I carefully crafted my words earlier to talk about the air raid passing scheme because the old-fashioned air raid developed by the late Mike Leach really leaned heavily on the passing game. Even at Mississippi State last season, there wasn't a ton of rushing happening with that team. They had a pretty decent running back and just didn't use him very much. That is not Garrett Riley's MO. He will make use of the running backs. He will make use of a power running game at that. So I'm going to be really fascinated to see what Shipley and Mafah can do in this scheme and very hopeful that the offensive line can make the most of it. I would not be surprised. Well, let me put it this way. The only thing that I've been able to think of to justify not running the ball more in that loss to South Carolina or that loss to Tennessee is just that you were beaten up on the inside of that offensive line in particular. Mitchell Mays was in for Marcus Tate, who was out for the year. Putnam had to play a ton of snaps. Parks had to play a ton of snaps. They had to be dinged up by the time things were winding down for the rest of the season. There has to be a commitment to get guys in more often as reserves, mix them in, sneak them in for a couple of plays, do what you can to save that wear and tear. Hopefully, Riley and Austin will be able to make that happen. And if they do, then Shipley and Mafah might be the biggest benefactors of that. Follow us on social media in between episodes at Clemson Kickoff, both on Twitter and on Instagram. Well, let's talk about basketball. The season does continue on campus thanks to the women's team winning 5 of its last 6 games. And by doing that, they have reached the Super 16 of the women's NIT. Their next game is coming at home in Littlejohn Coliseum Thursday at 7 against the Florida Gators, which just happens to be Coach Amanda Butler's old team.
It's an interesting matchup, and they had a good win the other night against Auburn. They pulled that win out. And I will say they play better at home. They're a different team at home. So it'll be nice to see this team get another shot at home, see if they can continue to advance throughout this tournament. But really like what we've seen from this team this year. I know it's not what maybe people our age were used to with the women's team when they were going to the NCAA tournament every year. But this feels like a step in the right direction. And, they've had some growth. They've had some really good play throughout the year. I like what I've seen from Deja Bradford this year and really like what I've seen from Ruby Whitehorn, the freshman. So, she was a 5-star, all that hype that came along with her. Maybe she hasn't quite lived up to that, but she's been a pretty solid player and looks like there's another level for her to get to as she goes through her career.
Tigers come into the game at 19-15. They're averaging 66.4 points per game. They are winning the turnover battle all year long. Amari Robinson leads them in scoring with 13.9 points per game and in rebounds at 6.4 per game. Bradford with 10.2 points per game. Whitehorn with 9.6 points per game. They just seem to have gotten into a groove, and you hope it's going to hold up against the Gators and that Coach Butler will be able to have, at least in her mind, a little bit of a rivalry win, so to speak.
Yeah, that would be nice to see, wouldn't it? I know that would be a personal win for her if they could knock off Florida and after how her tenure ended with the Gators. And look, I'm glad she's Clemson's coach. I think she's done a solid job. Went to the NCAA tournament her first year, steps back the last couple of years for sure, but I think that was probably expected. And now it looks like they're back on the right track a little bit. And, hopefully that helps with recruiting. And it's always good to beat, one of those teams from the SEC.
Head on out to Littlejohn. Again, that's Thursday at 7. If you're able to make it, do so. If you can't, you can catch the game on ACC Network Extra. Check out our homepage, clemsonkickoff.com. You can hear all our old episodes there, lots of other resources available as well. Let's go ahead and talk about baseball and softball real quick. Boy, John Rittman's softball team is just absolutely rolling through the season overall, aren't they?
They are ranked fifth in the country by all the softball polls. And I mean, just think about that, Bill. This is their fourth season. They're 29-1. They're 6-0 in the ACC. They've just been dominant at home. Now they're going on the road these next couple of weeks. They'll go to Georgia Tech and then Boston College the week after in conference play. They will host South Carolina coming up on the 28th. So that'll be great to see them beat up on the Gamecocks at home. But they've got to continue to play well as they go out on the road here in conference play. But I don't have any doubt they will. They've got one of the best pitching staffs in the country. We know that starts with Valerie Cagle. But it's just such a dominant pitching staff that it kind of gives the offense time to kind of grow into the game a little bit. And we've seen that throughout this season where maybe they don't score a bunch of runs the first couple of innings, but then, they get some runs late and they've been given that chance to do that because the pitching staff is just so strong.
You just see highlight after highlight on social media. I'm looking forward to watching a few games now that things are settling down for me on the weekends a little bit, be able to check out the softball team a little more and just see what makes them tick. It's awesome to see them living up to such preseason expectations. Really the first time that they've been tabbed as, hey, this is a team that should get to Oklahoma City to the College World Series. And to this point, everything is clicking, even with some transfers coming in, some freshmen coming in. It's all fitting. And you have to give credit to the top, but you also know that it takes a lot of work from everyone on the roster to actually be able to execute, play together, and assemble a 29-1 record at this point in the year.
29-1 and 13 shutouts. Think about that. 13 shutouts. That's just remarkable.
As for baseball, also at Georgia Tech this weekend and coming in off of a walk-off win against Winthrop and then another win the next night against Kennesaw State.
A couple of good wins. It feels like this season is just about getting as many wins as possible, right? The weekend against Duke was disappointing. They lose the first game 3-2. Then they come back and win the next game 14-9, and then they're winning game 3 on Sunday where it feels like, okay, we can't get a sweep, but at least we can win the series. And then the bullpen falls apart and really fails them. But they did bounce back, Bill, and like you said, beat Winthrop. They beat Kennesaw State, where maybe the last couple of years, those were games they didn't win. And maybe early in this season, those were games they weren't going to win. So it's how many games can they win in the conference? Can maybe they sneak into the NCAA tournament? That's really all I'm kind of looking for this season. I don't have a whole lot of expectations because there are so many limitations on this team right now. The lineup, there's really no power. They're struggling to score runs. And then the pitching staff, they're trying to piece things together. But they're 14-8. I think you look at that as a positive and just hopefully they can continue to get better throughout this season.
8-2 in their last 10. Maybe that's a little bit of product of the schedule. We'll see how that plays out down the stretch. But I'll tell you this, I like seeing it after they had been 1-6 in their previous 7. Anything they can piece together, get that momentum rebuilt is going to matter a lot. 6 o'clock Friday in Atlanta, 4 o'clock Saturday in Atlanta, 1 o'clock Sunday in Atlanta. All will be on ACC Network Extra if you can't make the roadie. We will be back next week to let you know how things unfolded, take a look at everything. We'll get into how the offensive line performed in 2022. We've touched on it on a couple of episodes, but we'll focus on them in our next position group review. And of course, as news breaks, we will let you know what's going on. Seeing some recruiting developments out there that might turn into the kind of news that we will talk about. If that were to happen, we would bring that up as well. Until next time, I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers.